Oh boy, I guess the time has come. At long last, I'm diving into the world of VR. And as you might have guessed, I'm not exactly jumping for joy. It's not the game I'm about to ramble on about for hopefully the next 10 plus minutes that's causing my hesitation. It's more about my entire history with this medium. You see, I've had a bit of a rocky relationship with VR. A few years ago, back before I started this channel, I snagged an Oculus Rift S on sale. Back when Oculus was still its own brand, before it was swallowed up by Facebook's controversial Meta rebrand. And just to be clear, it's not like I've got a personal vendetta against Meta, but let's face it, the internet seems to have collectively decided to side-eye them. At first, I was hooked. For those initial weeks, VR did feel a little bit like magic, exploring new worlds, interacting with games in ways that felt revolutionary, all while stuck in my apartment because back then leaving it was a legitimate risk. Honestly, I wish I'd captured footage from that era because looking back, VR felt fresh, like a new frontier. Fast forward to today, and Meta's vision for VR just doesn't have that same spark. It feels standardized, like the corporate essence has drained the soul out of what could have been an extraordinary experience. And don't get me started on the catalog. After all these years, it's the same old handful of games being pushed, which is great for the developers who found success, but for seasoned VR users, it's starting to feel a bit stale. Worse still, the VR market is flooded with uninspired shovelware, low-effort clones and cash grabs that just make you question if the price tag is even worth it. It's enough to make anyone jaded. But, of course, that apparently didn't stop me. Last year, I caved in and picked up a MetaQuest 2 from Best Buy, just before they slashed the price by $100 and announced the upcoming MetaQuest 3. Same thing happened with the PlayStation 2's infamous price drop back in the day. If I told you how much I've actually used the MetaQuest 2 compared to how often it just sits there gathering dust, you'd probably want to slap me upside the head. And what's worse, most of the time spent with it hasn't been in games, it's been troubleshooting. Between connectivity issues, software updates, and the usual VR headaches, I've spent more time fiddling with it than actually enjoying it. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not saying you shouldn't pick one of these things up, just make sure you're fully aware of what you're signing up for. VR isn't as seamless or as fun as the ads make it out to be, but then again, what really ever is? So you might be wondering, why would I dive into covering a VR game despite my mixed opinions about the medium? Simple, it had mechs. This channel, after all, still revolves pretty much heavily around giant robots. And while I'll probably expand into more sci-fi stuff down the road, mechs are still the heart of what I do. When a 4v4 PvP mech simulation game popped up, it seemed like the perfect fit. More importantly, it offered something fresh, an intriguing twist on a familiar concept. And let's face it, that's always a tempting combination for any mech enthusiast. Or at least it should be. Now, some might argue that I should have just gone for experiences like Steel Battalion if I was after an immersive simulation, but, well, that's just way out of my price range right now. Sure, there are also other mech games in VR, but I didn't even know about War Robots VR until I'd already started writing this, so that wasn't even on my radar. And yeah, I know there are ways to get a Steel Battalion controller from Japan, but let's be honest, spending $300 or more on a single controller, that's just not realistic for someone like me with a family. Especially when I already dropped $300 on a VR headset years prior that's just been collecting dust up until now. My experience with Iron Rebellion has been a ride, to say the least. I played it during a pretty big transitional phase for the game. Back then, everything was unlocked from the start, and I was tossed into matches against AI bots. Sure, there were a few other players scattered around, but not many. It had this distinct old school vibe. No progression, no clear objectives, you were just there to play and enjoy the core gameplay loop. Now, while that kind of structure might still appeal to some players, it felt a little too retro for a VR experience, especially when VR games tend to thrive on modern, highly addictive, and often progression-based systems. Let's face it, most people dive into VR expecting cutting-edge innovation, and at that stage, Iron Rebellion didn't quite feel like it was delivering on that. Then again, what you expect and what you get are two entirely different things, aren't they? Of course, I'll also say that I've probably been spoiled by modern games. I like the grind, the idea of unlocking new gear, earning upgrades, and customizing loadouts. Even though I know it's just a well-designed carrot on a stick to keep me playing, it does work. There's something satisfying about working towards something, even if it's just all smoke and mirrors. So I felt a little bored being given a vast array of options right from the get-go, which, now that I'm saying that, sounds a little backwards.
Wait a minute!
But that doesn't matter anyhow, because as I was recording footage for this game, a new progression system rolled out just at the right time, because honestly, I was about to write Iron Rebellion off as one of those great concept but not much to show for it games. Not because the idea wasn't there, but because not many people were playing, the game was still in early access, and it felt as bare bones as a lot of other multiplayer VR titles, aside from the obvious heavy hitters of course. Overnight though, the game went from a spooky ghost town where you'd occasionally see a random player pop in while bots filled the gaps, to a thriving, legitimately fun experience with other players. Had I played this before that update, I doubt I'd be saying what I am about to now. See, I absolutely endorse picking up Iron Rebellion. For the price of a decent joystick setup, you instead can grab a VR headset in this game, and you'll get to experience what I think VR is best at: simulation. If you're looking for genuine mech simulation, it probably doesn't get much better than what Iron Rebellion delivers, at least not on this platform. Though at the same time, I'm not quite sure I'd endorse the actual VR headset itself, but it's a necessary evil to play something like this. Instead of going the easier route, making an on-the-rails shooter or something that plays like every other FPS in VR, developer Black Beach Studio decided to double down on making it as manual and immersive as possible. Every switch, lever, and screen you see in the cockpit, functional. In fact, they've even added a few features I don't think many mech fans would have thought of, but they're certainly going to appreciate it. For instance, every game and redeploy requires players to manually activate their mech by flipping a series of switches before starting. It's such a satisfying ritual, hitting those 4 switches and watching as your systems go from complete shutdown, with no display or functionality, to a fully powered up state. Suddenly, everything springs to life, the map visualizes before you, displays flicker on, and the mech is ready for action. I never got tired of it, and even though I wasn't exactly a top tier player compared to others, this feature alone kept me immersed. But the standout inclusion, and easily my favorite, is the fully manual repair system. To fix your mech, you have to pinpoint a damaged sector, put your mech into safe mode, and then pull a lever to release repair drones. It's such a brilliant tactile mechanic and adds so much to the immersion. You're not just clicking a button to heal, you're physically interacting with your mech, which reinforces the idea that you're operating a massive complex machine. It's the little details like this that make Iron Rebellion such a standout VR experience to me. Controlling your mech in Iron Rebellion demands both hands and a bit of patience. You have to physically grasp a joystick for the legs and a thumb pad to control the arms, simultaneously. And yeah, I probably should have talked about this core mechanic earlier, but here we are. It's unwieldy at first, absolutely, but that's the entire point of a simulation, isn't it? You're supposed to feel like you're piloting a massive, complicated machine. From the moment you jump in, it's all about learning and improving, memorizing the controls, and becoming familiar with how your mech responds. There are some really cool mechs you can unlock and mess around with, but here's the thing, I didn't feel like any of them had a unique identity. It's your standard medium, light, heavy archetypes. Design-wise, they're really great to look at, but in terms of gameplay, it's all very expected. Speed at the cost of armor, armor at the cost of speed, or a middle-of-the-road balance. Some mechs are a little bit more specialized, with one arm limited to a support accessory while the other handles a single weapon. That being said, the physicality of VR might make it difficult to craft truly distinct mech identities, no matter how much effort is put into the designs. So much of the gameplay feels like it comes down to a player's literal physical movement and how they interact with the controls. Maybe this is just a limitation of VR as a medium, something that developers will always have to contend with when creating simulation-heavy titles. It's hard to say whether this is something that could be overcome in future updates or even in VR games as a whole, but it's an interesting challenge to think about. In Iron Rebellion, the most important decision players face revolves around balancing speed and firepower. Do you want to dart around quickly in a light mech equipped with fast-firing weapons, or do you prefer a heavy, tank-like build that trades speed for massive explosive impact? Perhaps you want to lean towards the more ranged focus, where sniping becomes a viable option. Of course, there's a little more variety than just weapons, as this game also offers tactical tools like smoke bombs and deployable shields, which adds variety and strategy to engagements. With the game still being relatively fresh, much of the early experience focuses on experimentation. Figuring out how these options work, what fits your playstyle, and how to adapt to different scenarios are all significant parts of Iron Rebellion. It encourages you to play your way, pushing you to explore and refine your approach as you get comfortable with the mechanics. That is, as you make your way up in rank and unlock new weapons and mechs. Now, there is a reason I compared Iron Rebellion to MechWarrior. No, not because of the customization, it's pretty basic by comparison, but because of the community that formed around it. Jumping into the game after its 1.0 release, I wasn't prepared for the sheer boom in activity that followed. Matches were popping up everywhere, and players couldn't stop talking about how much they were enjoying it. Naturally though, MechWarrior and Hawken were the comparisons on everybody's lips. Now, I'm not much of a talker in multiplayer games, so I mostly just sat back and observed, but if this is even a glimpse of what people experienced back when they played MechWarrior 3 or 4 online, I think I finally understand why those games hold such a legendary status. The sudden influx of players injected so much energy into Iron Rebellion. Even as someone who prefers silence, I could feel the enthusiasm. Of course, this boom in players also completely broke the game at one point. What was supposed to be a controlled 4v4 match ended up spiraling into chaos as way more players joined than the system was even intended to support. But honestly, that chaos was just absolutely incredible. So Black Beach Studio, if you ever see this, please make larger scale battles a real feature. I know it was likely just a bug, but it showed the potential for what bigger conflicts could look like in this game. For a good moment, it felt like I was in the middle of a truly massive battle. Sure, I was essentially a red shirt, but it added this grand sense of scale and epicness to the experience, just to maybe make sure the UI can handle it first. Now, I have been singing Iron Rebellion's praises so far, but I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's perfect, because it's not. The developers have been working on this game for around 8 years, and while it's impressive, there's still a lot more to come. Black Beach Studios has released a roadmap showing what the future might hold, including a promised single-player mode. Now, you can technically play solo against bots, but a fully fleshed out single-player campaign or story mode is something that we'll have to wait for. That said, it's really great to see that it's already in the works. One of the big drawbacks right now is the UI, which can be frustrating, especially in a VR game. For some reason, the game didn't seem to like me using my right hand much. I don't know if this issue is just on my end, but I kept running into situations where only my left hand would function properly in the menus. On top of that, your hand can sometimes stick to the UI in an awkward way. It's slippery and imprecise. Changing weapons or mechs can turn into an ordeal because you're stuck sliding between options, trying to make an exact selection. It's frustrating and it breaks the immersion at times. Another issue is with momentum, specifically how the game registers it. Normally this wouldn't matter too much, but when you're in a pinch and trying to heal, it absolutely does. Pulling the lever to heal requires a deliberate motion. The game only cares about direction, not force, so if you don't hit the full range of motion it expects, the lever will not register, leaving you exposed for longer than you'd like. In tense situations, that can be pretty aggravating. So is Iron Rebellion VR's answer to MechWarrior? For now, it sure feels like it. The game does a great job of capturing that sensation of controlling a mech, and unless we somehow get a full dive VR experience in the future, I don't think it's going to get much better than this. Black Beach Studio has the chance to improve progression and customization, especially since they've already stated that the game's development won't end with the 1.0 release. This is really just the middle of the road for them, and I'm excited to see where it goes from here. Had it not reached 1.0 while I was playing, the review would have probably been a shorter eyes out section where I explored what the game offered and the potential it had. But with such a strong community already coming together so quickly, it looks like things are moving in the right direction. And I guess this is how Black Beach wants people to see the game, or they wouldn't have pulled it out of early access. As for whether it will last, I'm not sure. The longevity of multiplayer games is something I really don't have a lot of experience with, and honestly, it's so unpredictable that it would be pointless to try and make any guesses about it. Right now though, it's really solid. I just hope it stays that way, or even gets better. Despite my mixed feelings about VR, Iron Rebellion has proven that there's potential for something truly special in the space, especially for mech enthusiasts. It's got that raw, tactile immersion that makes piloting a mech feel like more than just a game. Sure, it's got its quirks and bugs to iron out, but it's clear that the developers are committed to improving the experience. Anyhow, I've been Kei-Nova, and I will see you in the next one.